For a man who has spent most of his 60-plus years being the strong, silent center of one of the biggest ranching operations in America, Ladd Drummond has had a run of years that would wear down someone half his age. He is best known to the public as Ree Drummond's husband, the rugged cowboy who shows up in the background of Pioneer Woman episodes fixing fences and hauling hay while his wife bakes cinnamon rolls for the camera. But behind that easygoing image is a man who has survived a broken neck, buried his father and his brother-in-law within roughly a year of each other, watched his children scatter away from the ranch he expected to hand down to them, and become an unwilling character in a national conversation about his own family's land history. None of it happened all at once, and very little of it looks like the dramatic, single-headline tragedy that clickbait videos love to invent. It has been slower and quieter than that, and in some ways that makes it heavier. There is no shortage of YouTube thumbnails promising a sudden collapse, a hidden diagnosis, or a shocking final chapter for Ladd Drummond, and almost none of them hold up once you actually go looking for a credible source behind the claim. The real story doesn't need exaggeration. It's already a lot, and it's worth telling accurately. The story most people point to first is the accident that nearly ended everything. On March 10, 2021, a grass fire broke out on Drummond land in Osage County, Oklahoma, and Ladd and his nephew Caleb Drummond each climbed into a fire truck to go fight it. Caleb drove south on County Road N3660 while Ladd drove north, and in blinding wind and dust the two trucks collided almost head-on. Caleb was thrown roughly 70 feet from the wreck and airlifted to a Tulsa hospital with a concussion, broken ribs, and other injuries. Ladd, remarkably, was still able to stand and walk afterward, and in classic cowboy fashion he waved off paramedics so they could focus on his nephew, then drove himself to a hospital in Pawhuska to get checked out. It was only once doctors examined him that the real damage became clear. Ladd had fractured his neck in two separate places, and one of those fractures was, in his wife's own description, very close to being catastrophic. He was rushed to Tulsa for emergency surgery, where a neurosurgeon stabilized the injury with rods and hardware, and he spent the following weeks in a neck brace, determined enough to walk his daughter Alex down the aisle at her wedding just weeks later without it. That crash alone would have been enough hardship for most families to talk about for years. But the Drummonds didn't get much of a chance to catch their breath before grief started arriving in waves. In late October of 2021, Ree's older brother, Michael Smith, known to Pioneer Woman fans as Cowboy Mike for his appearances on the show, died unexpectedly in Bartlesville at the age of 54. Michael had developmental disabilities and had been a fixture of Ree's life since childhood, and his death hit the whole extended family hard, Ladd included, since the two men had spent decades side by side at family gatherings and on the ranch. Just over a year later, in November of 2022, Ladd's own father, Charles Chuck Drummond, died peacefully in his sleep at 79 after a couple of months of declining health. Chuck was the patriarch who had taught Ladd and his brother Tim everything about cattle and about running the operation, and his passing meant Ladd and Tim were now the last two Drummond brothers standing, responsible for hundreds of thousands of acres with the man who built their education in ranching no longer around to lean on. It's worth remembering, too, that this wasn't the family's first experience with sudden loss. Ladd's oldest brother, Todd, died in a car accident decades earlier while still in high school, and Ladd and Ree's mother-in-law, Nan, had died back in 2018. By the time Chuck passed, two brothers and two parents were already gone from that generation, and the weight of the entire operation had narrowed down to Ladd and Tim alone. While the family was dealing with those very real losses, the internet was busy inventing losses that never happened. In the spring of 2024, a YouTube video with a dramatic, funeral tone title claimed Ree Drummond had received a devastating cancer diagnosis and that Ladd was stepping back from the ranch to care for her. The video spread fast, racking up hundreds of thousands of views and getting picked up by aggregator sites and other channels chasing the same traffic. There was just one problem: none of it was true. Ree herself, Food Network, and every credible outlet that looked into it confirmed there had been no cancer diagnosis of any kind. What was actually going on with Ree's health was far less dramatic and far more relatable than a hidden illness. Starting in January of 2021, she had quietly lost close to 50 or 60 pounds through portion control, cutting out sugar and alcohol, and adding in walking, rowing, and strength training, and she has said publicly and repeatedly that she did not use Ozempic, Wegovy, weight loss gummies, or any other medication to do it. She addressed the rumors head-on more than once, making clear she has no judgment for people who do use those medications, but that her own results came the slower, more ordinary way. The cancer story was pure fabrication built on top of a real, much less sensational transformation, and it is a good example of how quickly a wellness update can be twisted into a tragedy for clicks. If there is a real source of strain on Ladd right now, it isn't a secret illness or a cover-up. It's the sheer size and relentlessness of what he and his family are responsible for. The Drummond Land and Cattle Company controls roughly 433,000 acres across Osage County, making the family the largest landowners in that county and one of the largest ranching families in the entire country according to the Land Report's annual rankings. On top of running cattle across that footprint, the family has spent nearly 2 decades under federal contracts with the Bureau of Land Management to hold wild horses on their land, a program that has paid them tens of millions of dollars over the years and that, at its peak, had Ladd overseeing thousands of horses at once. Then there's the Mercantile, the restaurant, bakery, and general store and Ladd opened inside a century-old brick building in downtown Pawhuska in 2016, which reportedly draws thousands of visitors a day and turned their sleepy hometown into a genuine tourist destination almost overnight. Pawhuska itself has fewer than 3,000 full-time residents, so a business pulling in that kind of daily foot traffic doesn't just add pressure on in the kitchen, it changes the rhythm of the whole town Ladd grew up in. Alongside the Mercantile sits the boarding house, the boutique hotel the family opened across the street, and tours can be arranged from there out to the lodge, the working ranch house where much of the Food Network's show is actually filmed. None of that runs itself, and none of it pauses just because the two men holding the ranching side together are grieving, healing, or simply tired. Running cattle, managing federal horse contracts, and helping keep a retail and hospitality business afloat is a lot for any two brothers to carry, especially two brothers now doing it without the father who trained them and without the extra hands their own children once represented. And that's really the heart of what's changed for Ladd in the last few years. The next generation isn't necessarily coming home to take over. Ladd and Ree have 5 children between them, including their foster son Jamar, and each one has followed a different path. Their oldest, Alex, married Mauricio Scott and now lives in Dallas, where she made Ladd a grandfather for the first time when their daughter Sophia was born in December of 2024. The couple announced they were expecting a second child in the spring of 2026. Paige, their second daughter, actually did come home and work the ranch full-time for a stretch after college, getting genuinely banged up alongside her father in the process, but she married David Anderson in 2025 and the couple has since relocated to Dallas as well. Their son Bryce played college football, first at North Texas and then closer to home at Oklahoma State, where he became a graduation candidate in the spring of 2025, and made headlines for a different reason in May of 2024 when a Stillwater police officer investigating a disturbance found him behind the wheel of a parked truck and arrested him on suspicion of driving under the influence. The misdemeanor charge was dismissed that same year after a judge ruled the officer lacked probable cause for the stop, but a separate civil action still stripped him of his driver's license for a time, and although he and his attorney fought the revocation, the Oklahoma Court of Civil Appeals upheld it in August of 2025. Their youngest son, Todd, plays quarterback at the University of South Dakota while studying business, and Jamar, who joined the family as a foster son back in 2019 and has spoken warmly about Ladd as a father figure, played college football at the University of Central Oklahoma. None of that is scandalous by itself, but taken together it paints a picture Ladd has to face every morning. Out of 5 kids raised on a working cattle ranch, none of them are currently living there full-time or clearly positioned to take it over, which leaves a genuine question mark hanging over who runs those 433,000 acres a generation from now. At the same time, the Drummond name has been pulled into a much bigger spotlight than a cooking show ever put it in. Ladd's cousin, Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond, announced a run for governor at the Osage County Fairgrounds in Pawhuska in January of 2025, ending months of speculation and instantly turning the extended Drummond family into a subject of statewide political coverage rather than just ranch and recipe features. Gintner grew up in nearby Hominy, a descendant of the same Frederick Drummond who first settled the family in Osage County generations ago, and his campaign has leaned heavily into that ranching heritage even as it puts every branch of the Drummond name, Ladd's included, under a much brighter and more political kind of scrutiny. Around the same time, growing public interest in the Osage Nation's history, fueled in large part by Martin Scorsese's film Killers of the Flower Moon, has led journalists and historians to take a harder look at how families like the Drummonds came to own such a large share of Osage County in the first place, a history that stretches back over a century and that touches on land transactions from the era of the Osage murders. Gintner Drummond himself has acknowledged publicly that there are understandably hard feelings today, given how much of their original land the Osage no longer hold. Ladd and Ree have not weighed in on that history themselves, but it's the kind of scrutiny that comes with being one of the most visible ranching families in the country, and it adds one more layer of pressure onto a name that used to just mean cinnamon rolls and cattle drives. So what does all of this actually add up to for Ladd Drummond right now? Not a hidden illness, not a secret tragedy, and not the kind of single dramatic headline that keeps getting recycled in his and Ree's comment sections. As recently as this past January, Ree and Ladd were photographed together saving a newborn calf during an Oklahoma snowstorm, looking tired but very much present and very much working side by side, the same way they have for decades. What's really going on is quieter and, honestly, more relatable than any fabricated diagnosis: a man in his 60s running an enormous, physically brutal operation with fewer people around him than he used to have. His father is gone. His brother-in-law is gone. His own body has already survived one accident that could have ended very differently. His children have built good, independent lives, but mostly somewhere else. And his wife, the most recognizable face of the family, has spent the last several years openly writing about the exhaustion that comes with trying to do all of it at once, going as far as naming slowing down as one of her stated goals for the year ahead. None of that is the kind of thing that trends on social media the way a fake cancer scare does, but it's real, and it's the sort of pressure that doesn't announce itself with a single dramatic moment. It just accumulates, morning after morning, cattle drive after cattle drive, until a man who has spent his whole life being the toughest person in the room has to start being honest about how much longer he can keep running at the same pace. Whether Ladd Drummond slows down, hands more of the operation to his brother Tim, or simply keeps pushing through the way he always has is something only time, and the next generation of Drummonds, will actually answer. What does seem clear is that the version of the story worth paying attention to isn't the one built on invented diagnoses and manufactured deathbed scenes. It's the far more ordinary, far more human story of a rancher in his 60s trying to hold together nearly 500,000 acres, a national television brand, and a family that loves him, all while quietly figuring out how much of it he can still carry on his own shoulders.